The Strategic Petroleum Reserve cannot save you. Everybody wants a magic bullet, especially when there's a monster around. And anyone who's filled up their car has seen what's lurking behind the pump. Just look at this chart we put together for you. What happens when the average price of a gallon of gas tops $5? Mr. President, do something. As we have recently seen, ordinary people get angry. Then the pressure builds on the politicians to do something. And there's a general sense of urgency. The most famous example was during the 1970s. Stagflation saw wages flatten while inflation soared. Inflation topped at 11% in the US, in the UK peaking at over 20%. Much of the crisis was due to the infamous oil embargo of 1973 and 74. That was OPEC flexing for the first time. In response, the US created the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, known in the industry as the SPR, the world's largest emergency supply of petroleum. Now, fast forward, we're in a similar situation today, with inflation reaching 8.6% in the US in June. The United States Petroleum Reserve, also known as the SPR, holds hundreds of millions of barrels of crude oil in case of an emergency. With sky-high prices at the pump, this begs the question, where's the SPR? Why not open it up? Let that oil flow. That's a good question, but in fact, the SPR taps have already been opened. Over 129 million barrels of oil have been released from the SPR over the past 12 months. 3 critical facts investors must know about the SPR, and they all lead to the same conclusion. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve won't save consumers from high prices. Why? The SPR doesn't solve long-term structural issues. First and foremost, the SPR is a temporary supply-side solution. It was never meant to function as a price control over the long term. The SPR works by providing an alternate source of petroleum supplies. If supply drops in one area, say another oil embargo from Arab nations, as in the 1970s, the SPR can be used to keep the oil flowing. And by providing extra supply, the SPR can, in theory, keep prices slightly lower. The SPR supplies the same fuel to companies that set the prices. The SPR is actually open now, with the President Biden authorizing the release of 1 million barrels a day from the reserve. And the most recent numbers reflect that 25.2 million barrels of oil left the SPR sites in June, just a bit under the 1 million barrels a day target. But who gets the oil? Marathon, Valero, those types, the oil refiners that supply most of the US with the fuel for the pumps. After all, the SPR sells crude oil, not refined gasoline. If there's a bottleneck with the refineries, then the SPR is not the solution. And of course, the SPR has a limited supply, in part because of another fact that's often ignored. The SPR, Congress's dirty secret. It's the strategic reserve, like a fire alarm. Don't open it unless there's an emergency. So how did the President of the United States get away with opening the SPR now? Turns out he's not the only one who has tapped the SPR early. From 2015 to the present, no fewer than 6 bills in Congress, several of them bipartisan, have used SPR sales as a source of funding. Need some extra cash to fund infrastructure, to pay down the deficit, to fund some tax cuts? Just plan some SPR sales sometime down the road, and boom, easy money. So if Congress is already abusing the SPR, why get mad when someone else does it too? As an investor, here's what's happening. You've got a reserve that was never intended to control prices. All releases go to the same supply chain that's already having issues. Both Congress and the president aren't using the SPR as initially planned. The SPR won't solve the current price shock. It just can't. The SPR isn't meant to control prices. It's meant to add a supply for the US in an emergency, tiding things over till the supply chains are restored. But what is the rest of the world decided to tap in? The global strategic reserve. US oil exports have skyrocketed over the past few months. In weaning itself off Russian oil and gas, the EU is buying up all the supply it can find. Look at this chart we put together of the US monthly crude exports to Europe. This is a record high to the European nations from the US. Over the past few months, the SPR has been releasing nearly 1 million barrels of oil per day. This would rank the SPR as the 9th largest producer in the world if you compare it to recent production from the OPEC nations. Think about that for a second. Here's a pie chart of OPEC crude oil production, and just the SPR would put it in the top 10. It is somewhat ironic that just a few short years ago, in the depths of the pandemic, we were concerned about the SPR and oil storage overflowing due to demand destruction. Now we have the exact opposite problem: too much demand and not enough supply. So what happens if the SPR runs dry? Don't wait till then to re-examine your portfolio. There are plenty of opportunities out there, even in a bear market plagued with uncertainty, as long as you know where to look. I do. At Katusa Research, all my subscribers know my thoughts on the market and where I'm putting my investment dollars to work. Look, I've got my wish list handy, and I already know what price I'd be willing to pay for each company on my wish list. Stay safe. Subscribe to the KRO, which is a Katusa Resource Opportunities, to find out exactly what prices I'm buying at and what price I sell at before the trade occurs. And you get to sell before I do. If you want to give your portfolio an edge, consider becoming a member and giving it a try for yourself.